Lightweight, affordable prisms are all the rage nowadays. Primary Arms has really cornered the market with their SLX and GLX series prisms. It seems though that Burris wants to get in on the action with this RT-3. As you could probably imagine, the 3 stands for a 3x magnified prism. On paper, the spec sheets between this and the SLX 3X are so close that you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. However, paper is only part of the equation. The more important question that we have to answer is, what are the differences physically about this and the SLX that would make you want to buy this over that? Like I already said, on paper these things are very close, but so far physically, to the keen-eyed viewer, you will note that this thing and the SLX couldn't be farther from one another. For anyone wondering, I did buy this used with my own money to make a review against the SLX 3X because I was genuinely curious. Could anything really top that for the price? The fast focus eyepiece on this is very loose. You could see how much it's wiggling right there. The original owner of this said that he cared for it pretty well and didn't have any sort of issues with it or bangs with it. So I'm going to take that with a grain of salt and say that they weren't lying. And that only makes the looseness of the rear eyepiece that much more worrying. It is very, very loose.
They honestly feel and sound pretty damn good.
The turrets are easily accessed and are very legible. Inside the actual slot for a screwdriver, a coin, or a shell casing is the line that indicates where you are on the turret themselves. It's a nice little place to put it where it's out of the way and easy to notice. The battery compartment being off at the 3 o'clock position for me being a right-handed shooter means that the battery compartment is going to be a little bit less out of my peripheral vision, with my left eye being able to see more to the left side of the scope. Once we remove the battery cap, it exposes the standard CR2032 battery that is held extremely firmly in by 8 spring fingers, which did not want to let this battery go. But that's a very good thing. I don't like compartments that have a loose battery. It was so tight in there I had to get a little screwdriver to pry it out. Once I did, you could see that we have a standard 3-dimple base to the PCB board, and the battery clicks in there with authority. The cap itself has a nice spring on the inside and a fat O-ring on the outside. I like that they put splines on the outside as well as a coin slot, so this way you could really crank down on this thing if you had to. It's a very nice battery compartment. Perhaps the biggest difference between this and the SLX is going to be the way that you operate the illumination. On all of the SLX lineups, they're all rheostats or rotary dials, but Burris opted for buttons. This is going to be a huge selling point for a lot of you because a lot of you don't like turnstile illuminations. I've actually had battery caps loosen up on me, and then when I go to tighten them down, the cuts for the coin is really shallow, so you really can't put a lot of pressure on them to make sure that they don't go anywhere. The buttons on this are very smartly placed. You look at the top of it, and up is up and down is down. It's very simple and easy. Another thing is the buttons sound and feel really good, and the fact that they're raised up a little bit means that you know exactly which button you are on when you go to use them, much unlike the GLX 1X. The next thing to talk about is the mounting for this. It's fixed. You have a fixed offset and a fixed height. The SLX has the micro ACOG mount, so you could put any sort of spacer in there for height, offset, or mount. I really do think it's a much nicer setup than this. But maybe Burris was trying to make this thing as lightweight as possible. On my scale, it comes in at just about 8.5 ounces, which isn't terrible. However, what does the SLX 3X come in at, albeit with the smaller spacer in between it? 7.8 ounces, nearly a full ounce lighter. But let's say that the spacer would weigh in at about an ounce. So guess what? It's the exact same weight as the SLX 3X. The 3X SLX is also a little bit shorter, and I feel has a little bit nicer looking ergonomics to it. The bodies on the SLX and GLX prisms all look excellent, with the exception of the 2X GLX. It's sort of like a brick. But you can see that there are a few other key differences. Look at the size of the lens that they use on the Burris as opposed to the primary arms. It is much, much larger. The front objective, however, is the exact opposite. The primary arms has a much larger front objective, whereas the Burris looks like it's almost half the size. It's very interesting to see different companies producing different stuff and getting as you'll very soon see very similar results. Both of these are made in China, so don't get it twisted thinking that you're buying one from the Philippines, which is what Burris was known for a very long time. You're both getting stuff made from China. Another thing to take note of is the price. The SLX comes in at around the $320 price point, whereas the RT-3, from what I was able to find so far, around $390. So not only do you get a mounting solution that's fixed, but you also spend $70 more for it. More on the SLX soon. Let's focus our attention on the RT-3 and see what it's like to use by itself. Anyone who's a fan of the RT6 second focal plane 1:6 LPVO will look at this reticle and go, that looks really familiar. And it does look very familiar, but it's actually the Ballistic 3X, which is dedicated to this prism, which is nice to see. However, one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of is just having the floating reticle be in the middle. I still would like some posts to draw my eye more towards the center. That, though, is a me thing. It might not be a you thing. The illumination on this does get very bright, definitely closer to daytime bright than not. You will see some pulsating coming from it, but that's just the refresh rate from the LED emitter versus the frame rate for my camera. Some people are very sensitive to it, but others will never notice it. Despite this only being a 3X prism, I was still curious to see how it was going to track or to see if there was any slop in the erectors. First though, let me show you just how loose that rear eyepiece is. This is me just taking the back and moving it around. It's that loose. It literally feels like it's just going to pull out, and not in a good way. All jokes aside though, I'll let you listen to the onboard audio so this way you get a better sense of how this thing is performing. Going to the left, to the right. There's a full click of slop on the windage. Let's check the elevation. Going up, down, up. Yep, there's a full click of slop on the elevation as well. Down, up. Yep. And as you can see from me just grabbing the eyepiece and wiggling it, holy cow. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I legitimately have the same laugh as my 2-year-old. Anyway, going into my backyard early to mid-spring. Yes, I've had this optic for some time, and it got delayed when, life happened. But nevertheless, we have a decent view looking through this thing. Illumination on full here, you'll see, does get decently bright, but the flicker, again, is a result of the LED refresh rate syncing in with my camera's shutter speed. That paper target's roughly between 75 and 80 yards away. We have a beautiful view looking through it. The reticle does get a little bit fuzzy all the way past the shadows, but inside the actual usable space of this thing, both the image and the reticle maintain a very high level of sharpness. It has excellent image stability. The exit pupil also seems pretty good. I measured about 6.4 millimeters. I couldn't find any other information online. Comparing it to the primary arms SLX 3X, that comes in around 7.4 millimeters. What that gives you is a dynamic eyebox that's pretty usable. The eye relief on this is set to around 2.6 inches, and from there, you can pull out a little bit and still have a fairly usable image, but you could only choke up on it a little bit more before it really starts to get hairy on you. The Eyebox is definitely far from bad, but I'm really impressed by this thing's image stability. It also looks like there's very little shift to the image when we are starting to dance around it like this. It's a very stable and good looking image. In fact, it is an excellent performance overall. This thing has a 20mm front objective, as you saw earlier. It is significantly smaller than what Primary Arms has with their SLX 3X. As a result, the low light performance is a little on the lacking side. Looking at the target out in the distance and the tree up close, you could see that to the naked eye, or at least to the naked camera, it's decently bright. But getting behind this thing, it definitely seems like it's a lot darker of an image. Bleed back from the illumination on the reticle being a little bit too bright is not uncommon with first focal plane scopes, but on second focal plane scopes and prisms, it's a little bit more unique. Ideally, though, you're not going to have it set to too bright anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal. The low light performance, though, is a little bit lackluster. From there, let's get right into the side-by-side comparisons. On the left will be the RT-3, and we're going to start out with the Trijicon TA-33 on the right. Both of these are 3x prisms. Both of them, however, sort of end right there as far as the similarities go. The TA-33, I had some issues with the tracking. A lot of people thought it was the mount that wasn't a Trijicon mount. It wasn't the case. The TA-33 that I had just sort of sucked. And comparing the RT-3 to the TA-33 here, you can really get a sense for why I didn't like the TA-33. The view through it is so minuscule that it's hard to put into words. These are both cropped the exact same way. The RT-3 claims to have a field of view of 7.2 degrees or 38 feet at 100 yards. The TA-33, 3.7 degrees or 19.4 feet at 100 yards. That is, as near as makes no difference, half the size of the RT-3. Simply amazing. As far as the price goes, the TA-33s are $1,000, and again, the RT-3s are around that $390 price point. So as near as makes no difference, 2.5 times more expensive. However, the Trijicons are of course made in the USA, whereas the Burrises are made in China. But if you're seriously cross-shopping the RT-3 against anything, I highly doubt it's going to be the TA-33. It might be more along the lines of this: the frankly excellent Primary Arms GLX 2X. Now, it's true, these are not identical. One's a 2X, one's a 3X. Price point, though, the GLX comes in around $370 to the Burris is $390. The field of view is also going to be different because, again, we have a difference in magnification. I did shift the GLX a little bit farther forward to help illustrate why that thing is so good. Its eye relief and its overall setup with its exit pupil is tremendous. What are those numbers, just so you are aware? Well, the eye relief on the Burris is set to about 2.6 inches. As for the primary arms, the GLX, it's 3.5 inches. So it's a full inch farther forward at its best, but you could still push it past another inch or so and still use it perfectly fine. And part of the reason for that is that the GLX has a monstrous exit pupil, almost twice the size of the RT-3. That's 12 millimeter to roughly 6.4. That is huge. These are, however, two totally different prisms. It's a 2X versus a 3X. You have a much smaller view looking through with the GLX, but a much larger and more plentiful exit pupil and eye relief. But the RT-3 does have a much larger view looking through it. So you're not probably going to be cross-shopping this RT-3 with the GLX. You're probably going to be doing it against this, the SLX 3X. I started out earlier by saying these two on paper are so similar that you wouldn't be able to tell the differences between them on paper. And let's run right down the list. Price, $320 for the SLX, $390 for the RT-3. Field of view, basically identical, 38 feet or 7.2 degrees. As far as the weight, we already saw that, but it's about a 10% discrepancy between the two, mount depending. Eye relief. The SLX claims 2.7 inches, whereas the RT-3 2.6 inches. As far as the exit pupil, again, I already touched on that. The SLX is a little bit larger at 7.4 millimeter versus 6.4 millimeter. And here on the range, different days, of course, but very similar lighting conditions. Both of these views are almost the same. However, I will give maximum sharpness and clarity to the RT-3 by a bit. The SLX is still very good when it comes to overall brightness, sharpness, and clarity to the image, and it's something that I feel I wouldn't really feel the need to have more of. However, the RT-3 does look like it has the edge sharpness-wise. These two really do go toe-to-toe to one another, and I gotta say, it's really hard to figure out which one is the overall better optic. The reason why I say that is because everyone's going to have a different opinion on what is more important for them. For you, you might like a certain brand. For others, they might specifically look for the features that the scope has. For others, it's all about the maximum performance. If you are about the maximum resolution and sharpness to the image, the RT-3 is exceptionally nice. It's got wonderful edge-to-edge sharpness in bright conditions. Here, you can easily see that everything is nice, sharp, clear, and in focus. From those bushes out at about 30 yards to the behind the berm at 200, everything is exceptional. It's got a good amount of field of view, it's a decent enough weight, the exit pupil is good enough, and so is the eye relief. And sometimes good enough really is good enough. Personal preferences aside, this is a very competent package. Sure, the illumination right here might be flickering like a blown out fluorescent lamp inside of an abandoned school, but you probably won't notice it that much to the naked eye. I say that because some people are much more sensitive to the refresh rates on emitters than others. You might notice it, you might not. It's all just a matter of how your eyes function. Yes, there's a little bit of play to the erectors. Yes, there's a lot of play to the eyepiece. But overall, the rest of this is a very competent package. I do think that $390 or so is a little bit too expensive for this, especially when the SLX comes in at $70 less. That's 20% less expensive. And it offers a lot of what this scope offers and then some. And what I mean by that is it just brings more to the table. The ability to change the height, offset, and mount style to the SLX or the GLX optics really do make them, in my opinion, a much more versatile option. Because let's say you get this and you wish it was a little bit higher or a little bit lower. You're stuck dealing with what you get, unless you put a spacer underneath it, and then you're just building up a jank setup. In this instance, I absolutely do prefer the push buttons as opposed to the rotary dial because the buttons are very easy to pick up with your fingertips, again because of how the buttons are raised. That is someplace where primary arms themselves with the GLX 1X drop the ball. The rheostats are decent, but I wish that they would be improved. Better texturing on the outside and making that battery cap be recessed so this way you don't have to worry about accidentally unscrewing it. It's for most of those reasons why I still think that the SLX is a slightly better purchase than this. However, if you like what you were seeing here, I think you could do far worse than buying this RT-3. And that is going to end this review. A huge thank you to all of you, my viewers, and my paid subscribers. It's because of all of you that I was able to buy this to review it, and subsequently I am going to sell it. Not because I think it's a bad optic, I just don't have a use for it. I bought it solely to compare against others for your enjoyment and your buying pleasures. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. As always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.